Dun 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 dun.
No! God, please, no!
We're gonna stay calm. We're gonna stay calm. We're not gonna rant today. We're not gonna rant. We're gonna try to stay positive. We're gonna try to stay positive and talk about the good things that I found in the Batman movie. Only the good things. There is nothing else. Just good. Just good. Just good. First of all, I wanted to thank all the people who watched my Batman review. It came out like a month ago approximately, and I think now it's gathering a little bit more following because the film finally came out on HBO Max. And I just want to thank you for all the people who shared my opinion, for all the people who didn't but still wanted to share theirs in the comments. I see you and I appreciate everything that you've done and all the engagement that you created. I'm really proud of that video, to be honest, even though it's not one of my funniest videos, and I enjoy the lulz. I make most of my videos for the lulz.
Adeline!
Shame!
Adeline!
James! James!
The concept of this video is that I wanted to try and change a couple of things when it comes to the Batman script to make it perfect. I especially had problems when it comes to the tension and the pacing of the film itself. It was basically non-existent. I found that the film was not that exciting, and on a rewatch I was incredibly bored. I actually had a really hard time not looking at my phone for the entire 3 hours. But anyways, today I don't want to complain. Today I want to be chill. Today I want to imagine what a perfect The Batman movie would look like. And I think that we have to start with the tension and the pacing. And to do that we have to address the most important aspect of this film, which is the detective Batman aspect, which in my opinion was not really well handled. Especially when you try to retrace the investigation and all the different riddles. In the film, Batman is kind of like always one step behind the Riddler, and it's done on purpose. The Riddler never gives him a chance to beat him. The Riddler is just basically feeding information to the Batman very slowly, and in the meantime we've got someone else who is actually leading an interesting investigation and is turning out a lot of results, and it's Catwoman. It is established, for example, that she's trying to first protect Annika by retrieving her passport, and then right after that she's trying to find her because she got kidnapped, only to eventually find her body at the Penguin's drug bust, where Batman is at the same time. And we don't really know exactly how Catwoman managed to do that, or whether she actually knew that her body was there, because it seems like in the film that she was reaching for the money. She wasn't really looking for Annika. I mean, her motivations are incredibly weird in this film. At one point she's trying to save her friend, at one point she's trying to gather as much money as possible that she can stop working at the club. At another point she's trying to reconnect with her dad, but also commit vengeance against him because of how her mother was treated. But at the same time she wants to avenge Annika's death. It's not really clear what she's trying to do.
What do you want? What do you want?
It's not that simple.
What do you want? What do you want?
I like big butts and I cannot lie.
But here I wanted to point out just the fact that thanks to Catwoman's investigation, that's exactly what brings Falcone out in the light, and it's not Batman at all. Because if you think about it, Catwoman is the one who finds the guy who actually killed Annika, and she is the one who manages to retrieve the phone and the recording where it is clearly stated that Falcone is the one who killed Annika, and Falcone is the one who is basically controlling the whole city, commissioners, DAs, and blah blah blah. It is really weird, to be honest, that she would manage to get such a clear confession in just one call. Let's pretend that that doesn't exist, because the plot is already way too complex and we can't really address every single detail within it. And thanks to her and to the fact that this recording is gonna be leaked, the police is gonna be able to catch Falcone and bring him into the light, meaning that Batman's investigation at the end of the day didn't save anyone. And at the end of the day, Catwoman was kind of like a third partner in this weird threesome in between the Riddler and Batman. But the Riddler is not considering her at all, even though she's a clear piece of the puzzle and a more important one than Batman when you think about it, which is incredibly weird. Because when you think about it, everything that Batman investigates is revealed to the press by the Riddler through pictures and videos, meaning that the Batman isn't really unmasking the truth like the Riddler wants him to. He's just on the ride and following the waves of the Riddler's revelations. And as I said before, he's always a step back, right? And the only thing that Batman does when you think about it, it's when we go back to the third act and he saves all of those people at the stadium. That's the only thing that actually brings some kind of positive outcome if we're talking about the Riddler specifically, about that specific plot line, right? If you want to rewrite this properly, we have to make sure that the investigation the Batman is leading actually matters. It doesn't matter, of course, whether this is a young or an old Batman. This has to do with the script itself, because we can see a Batman that fails. So I'm not saying that Batman Year 2 should be able to unmask and save everyone, but I'm saying that you need to convince us that at the end of the day it is maybe possible, even though the outcome is completely the opposite. And I feel like during this investigation in the film itself, I was never convinced that Batman could actually succeed at stopping him, because he never does. Every single person that the Riddler wants to kill ends up dying, and that makes for poor tension and pacing, because you just don't believe that your main character can win. It is not exciting to watch. Another thing that I addressed in the other video, which I'm gonna be linking up here by the way, just in case you didn't see it, is that there are so many people who die in this film, but they're just pawns, they're just side villains who appear at every 20 minutes or so within the film itself, so that we can get something gruesome to look at. But at the end of the day, we never actually care about them because we know nothing about them. And that's something that I wanted to fix as well when it comes to the script. There is an easy fix that we can already do when it comes to that. So think about Coulson, right? The DA, he's the one who dies with the bomb strapped on his neck. Incredible easy thing to do to make sure that there is some kind of relationship in between Batman and the victims that he's trying to save. Make sure that Coulson replaces the guy that Batman saves at the very beginning. He saves this random guy who happens to be there at Halloween night, and these thugs are trying to beat him up. What if that random guy was actually Coulson? Once you realize that, when you are at the funeral and Batman realizes that this person that he just saved a couple of days maybe earlier is about to die once again because of the Riddler's game, funny enough, it doesn't matter whether this person is corrupt or not, because Batman is gonna be feeling all of these weird emotions, being like, I saved this person. And the Riddler, by killing him, he's basically undoing all the good work that I did a couple of weeks ago by stopping those thugs. And there you've got some emotional resonance when it comes to this character here. I'm not saying that he cannot be bad, he cannot be corrupt, but I want to connect to him in a kind of way. The commissioner as well. When the commissioner is killed, this is one of the scenes that we don't really get to see, because we discover that he's killed through the first video, I think, that the Riddler posts online. This is the rat mask, the maze with the cipher written at the bottom of it, that has a weird kind of soul trap. But we don't really know the commissioner, and no one seems to care at all that he's disappeared. No one seems very sad about it. And this fact here is even more increased by the fact that at the funeral, imagine that scene, remember that scene there, as everyone is arriving, there are a lot of protesters being like, unmask the truth, everyone is the villain, politicians are corrupt, it's so disgusting, blah, 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 blah. But we are at kill number 2 right now. The first one being this guy who it was revealed that he was having an affair. Who cares? Like, who cares? Politicians having an affair? And the commissioner, we don't really know exactly what he did. I don't seem to remember exactly what he was shown, besides the fact that once again the Riddler was showcasing these pictures of him at the club with other villainous people, which is kind of weird, because as a commissioner, as a cop, I'm pretty sure that you would be discussing and talking with evil people, you would be discussing with gangsters, you would be always in rapport with these kind of people. You have to have access to everyone, right, to be able to do your job. So it doesn't necessarily imply that you're doing something weird, right? You're doing something illegal. So that's why I don't understand why all those protesters were there. And once again, it turned kind of like the commissioner into this villainous creature that we don't really care about, and we don't even know why we're going to his funeral, because at the end of the day we barely knew him. An easy idea when it comes to the commissioner, it would be to show, for example, that the commissioner actually accepts Batman, is not really contrary to the fact that Gordon keeps him around when it comes to the crime scenes and everything. Maybe they could make a couple of jokes even at the crime scene, being like, oh, do you want to grab a beer right after, you know, something like that, something incredibly stupid. But we do need some kind of emotional rapport so that we can see that people are just three-dimensional human beings, and at the end of the day, that's how you manage to make us care with those kind of tiny dialogue lines, so that we know that these people are not just monsters, they are everyday people that have been turned dark because of greed.
I'm just here to unmask the truth about this cesspool we call a city. You're part of this too.
Hands up! Stay still!
How am I part of this? Oh, you're really not as smart as I thought you were.
For example, Coulson, I think, was kind of going in the right way when you think about it, thanks to the performance of the actor who was playing him, who I really like, by the way, just because he felt really pitiful. But that's the only thing, that's the range of emotion that we went through with that kind of person. We felt pity for him because he was crying, he was trying to save his life as much as possible, and at the end of the day, nothing works out. There is another major thing in this film here that I have a problem with. I talked about it in the previous video, but I wanted to go more into details right now, and it's the fact that this movie kind of has way too many point of view characters, right? I want to talk specifically about the Riddler and the fact that we get to see through his eyes at times. We get to see the preparation that goes through when it comes to how he is gonna kidnap people, how he tapes people's faces and stuff like that. It is done in beautiful and stylistic ways. It really reminds me of weird, like Hannibal-like films, or films by David Fincher, those kind of psychological thrillers. So I'm not saying that stylistically and visually it's not powerful and it's not interesting to look at, but the problem is it removes the tension because we are never surprised. The thing when it comes to detective movies, if you think about Seven, for example, we never got to see the villain preparing the crimes and the crime scenes before maybe the third act. The villain appeared in the third act, and that's when we finally put a face onto the killer, right? But before then, it was just a shadow. It was nothing else. And that's what made Seven so incredibly interesting to look at, and such a perfect investigative thriller. And here we're stuck with a lot of images and videos that kind of look cool, that look interesting, that look edgy, that remind us a lot of things that the Joker did, for example, in the Dark Knight movie. But at the end of the day, it still feels very, very bland. Easy fix, don't do it. I honestly don't want to see the Riddler for the entire film, or make those scenes incredibly shorter so that we don't really understand exactly what's going on. It's an easy fix, but I think it will definitely build up the tension when it comes to all the different crime scenes, because we will be genuinely interested in what is happening within the crime scene, because we have never been there in the first place. Of course, if we go chronologically, after the underground scene where he beats everyone up, of course I have other things to say when it comes to that, but we can address it later on, especially when it comes to the fight choreography and the violence in the movie itself. I wanted to talk about the introduction of Batman, which really works in my opinion. I really like the voiceover diary entries.
But when that light hits the sky, it's not just a call. It's a warning to them.
And then seeing actually Bruce Wayne / Batman writing his diary entries after going on a crime scene, and filling us in when it comes to the investigation. That stuff really, really works quite well. I really enjoyed it, and it's really visually powerful. We can keep that stuff without a doubt. It was a really good introduction. I didn't really talk about Robert Pattinson's performance, for example, in my previous video, and I wanted to do it a little bit today because it's really good. I really loved Robert Pattinson's interpretation of Bruce Wayne and Batman himself as well. I think though that there is another problem which is once again related to the fact that this movie doesn't really have a lot of tension, and it's related to the fact that this movie is not violent enough. If we don't see Batman get hurt, if we don't see Bruce Wayne get hurt, we don't believe that he's an actual character. We don't believe that he's an actual human being, right? And there are so many scenes that I can think of where you could have, for example, built across the entire film an entire structure of violence where every single fight choreography, every single action scene, Batman gets injured in some kind of way, and he carries that injury until the very end of the movie, to the point that when he's finally there ready to fight the Riddler, he's almost incapable from a physical perspective. And that's exactly what the Riddler would do when you think about it as well, because the Riddler, as he says also later on in the movie,
We're such a good team.
We're not a team.
I never could have gotten him out of there. I'm not physical. My strength is up here. I mean, I had all the pieces. I had the answers, but I didn't know how to make them listen. You gave me that.
I gave you nothing.
so it will make a lot of sense that the Riddler would try to throw everything at the Batman so that he would get tired and tired and tired to the point that he wouldn't be able to fight him anymore. And that's something that was really not exploited at all within the film, and it's a bit of a shame. There is this scene, for example, I think it's the first time that he goes to the club. He goes straight to the front door and fights everyone. He gets shot by everyone. Literally, it's insane how many times Batman gets shot in this film and he barely flinches. But the scene that really killed me was when this guy prepares a shotgun and literally shoots him right like in the chest, and all Batman does is this. Oh! He does nothing else. And then he keeps fighting. And he ends up actually winning that fight because he ends up finding the Penguin and he keeps going with his investigation. I feel like that scene, for example, would have been a very easy thing to do, where a young Batman would be that spontaneous, would be that cocky, but at the end of the day, he has also to pay for his mistake, which is something that this Batman never does in this film here. He never pays for his mistakes. He never pays for the fact that he goes straight on fighting 5, 6, 7 people, getting shot at from all the different corners. He never gets injured once again. He's improvising most of the times, and it always pays off. That's the problem. That's a major problem when you're trying to create a believable main character. This is a Batman that is way too strong. This is a Batman that is way too stoic as well. I did really enjoy his kind of emo look and his depressive look. Maybe he also has that kind of like suicidal thing where he goes there guns blazing, not really giving a shit whether he's gonna survive or not. But at the end of the day, if physically we don't see that kind of stuff, we don't see that change on his body, we don't feel it. Another problem that I had with this film, and that I talked about in the previous video as well, was the Alfred problem. I didn't really enjoy Andy Serkis' performance when it comes to Alfred and his interpretation. I don't like the fact that we're going once again through that same relationship of Bruce Wayne not wanting to be Bruce Wayne and Alfred making him feel bad about it. It's Batman here too. Why would he need to be Bruce Wayne when he's clearly like a very young Bruce Wayne? There are probably people who are taking care of the company without him. So it makes no sense at all. And you could actually do that from just by changing a couple of things. Instead of having that conversation with Alfred where it ends up with him being like, "You're not my father, Alfred," which is such a cringy child thing to say. Instead, what if, for example, he's doing his investigation, maybe he's repairing some of his equipment, and Alfred has left him some notes or has left him some vocal messages, for example, and Batman slash Bruce Wayne, he's going through them, ignoring them as much as possible.
Hello, it's me.
And then we do get some kind of emotional resonance because he's ignoring not only his identity but also Alfred himself, and it's kind of sad, of course, because we know that of course the relationship between Alfred and Bruce Wayne is really important in this film. And I feel like it would be even more sad if the first way that we get to meet Alfred is just through his voice, and with Bruce Wayne slash Batman ignoring him instead of immediately having that conversation. Especially because all the scenes right after, Alfred doesn't talk about that stuff anymore. He's just completely forgotten about him, and for the entire film he's just helping him solve the crime of the Riddler without saying anything else. So it's a scene that it's really weird and it really stands out, and I think it definitely needed a little bit of changes. Let's keep going chronologically because I keep getting lost. We are at the club right now. That's also where he meets Catwoman for the first time, and he ends up following her, of course. And it's so incredibly stupid and so convenient as well when it comes to the script, because as he follows this girl, he finds Annika as well, who happens to be at her apartment, and at the same time he sees her change into her Catwoman costume and run away to get the passport, etc, etc, etc. And he's spying her in the same way that the Riddler was spying the other person. But I think the easy way to do that would have been not to introduce Catwoman that way, and for Batman, for example, to actually do his investigation and find Annika by himself. For me, Catwoman, it would have been way more interesting if we treated her character the same as the Riddler, meaning that she appears once in a while, she's just a shadow. She would be like a kind of parallel mirror version of Batman, which she's always been, with different morals, of course. And it would have been really interesting, for example, to see Catwoman arriving first on certain crime scenes, for example, as she was trying to rescue Annika. I also find that the Annika subplot has taken way too much space when it comes to the film itself, because when you think about it, Catwoman is working with Batman just because she wants to find Annika, while Batman is literally doesn't give a shit about Annika, because at the end of the day he just has to wait for the Riddler to commit another crime and give him another clue. Maybe she would have meddled with the evidence as well. Maybe she could have even stolen some of the enigmas that the Riddler was leaving behind, and she could have solved it for Batman, and then she could have just disappeared and kept going. The film could have been a race in between Catwoman and Batman trying to achieve different things, instead of being this weird cat and mouse thing where they're trying to work together but you don't really know why. Now we're gonna fast forward a little bit because I've discussed the other things just before. I want to forward to the funeral and to the moment where Bruce Wayne actually talks to Falcone. There is something that I don't understand at all when it comes to the script itself, and it's the fact that the Riddler wants to bring the Rat / Falcone into the light, meaning that Falcone controls the entire city of Gotham. He controls all the most powerful people in Gotham, but he doesn't ever leave his club through the front door. Never. He's never done it, which is incredibly insane. It's the most insane thing I've ever. How did he get to the funeral in the first place? Where did he leave from? So it makes no sense. So it makes no sense that this entire film, this entire almost investigation, is built around the idea of bringing Falcone out of his front door of the club, because the Riddler is living right across the street and he's waiting with his gun to shoot him. It makes no absolute sense, and we have to fix that somehow. And I have no idea how. I have no idea how, because it's incredibly stupid. While I was editing this video, I did actually come up with an idea that would kind of fix this problem here, and it is trying to assume that the Riddler never actually knew who the Rat was, and he was actually leading the Batman towards confirming maybe the suspicions that he had. In the film, it's clearly not that, because we see Batman, for example, when they're having that conversation on the laptop, and the Riddler is clearly telling him that he's really far away from knowing the whole truth. But if we do this small fix, for example, it would allow us to show that the Riddler couldn't just shoot at Falcone when he was leaving to get the groceries, for example, because maybe he didn't know exactly who the Rat was within the club itself, whether it was the Penguin or any other mobster within it. Let's fast forward a little bit. We are once again with Coulson. He has the bomb around his neck. This is another weird thing that I don't understand about this film, is that the Riddler, this time around, he's doing these riddles for Coulson. He's not doing them for Batman. Batman is just there standing, not doing anything, and suggesting maybe a couple of solutions, but at the end of the day, he's not even trying to save him. He's not even trying to be resourceful, to look around, to see what he could do to stop that bomb, and that really pisses me off. And of course, here we've got another things with that invulnerable Batman thing, where the bomb literally explodes in front of him, even though the Riddler gives him a 5-second ultimatum or something like that, and the Batman still stays there and gets the full blast of the explosion. A couple of incredibly easy fixes. I think it would have been interesting actually for the place not to be evacuated if there were some people around, and if the Batman not only had to try and save this person here, he had to try and save the people who were in the same radius as the bomb itself. And the Riddler could have been even like, if he doesn't solve the riddle, this will explode right now and all the people inside will die, meaning that the Batman not only would need to save this person, solve the riddles, but also save the people around it, so he would have to try to contain the explosion blast at the very least. That would have been the most interesting thing to do, I think. It would have been really interesting to see how Batman could be resourceful. Even Batman can sacrifice himself in some kind of way and be injured, and that can go through the entire film, but it has to make sense. It's not like that he was stupid and he kept standing there and took the full blast. It needs to make sense. There is another logical gap in the script here, for example. This is the funeral for the commissioner. There is police everywhere and there are shots of actual policemen with like a lot of machine guns and stuff like that. And this guy with a car managed to drive through the main entrance and through a lot of people and nobody shot him. Nobody. Nobody thought of shooting at him from outside. There is another logical gap right after where he gets stopped by the police, for example, and he just like knocks Gordon out and he runs away. The entire precinct is trying to catch Batman, and this thing here doesn't have any repercussions for the entire film. Nothing at all. He keeps hanging out with policemen in the third act, for example, and nobody tries to stop him in the same way that they tried to stop him back at the precinct, right? So it makes no sense. This was a scene that was there just to be cool, so that Batman could jump off the building and then crash against the bridge in the most stupid way possible. I would take away that scene. That scene should completely go off. It's completely useless when you think about it. It doesn't lead to anything interesting because at the end of the day, Gordon just as his face punched and there is nothing else going on, and the police still doesn't really trust Batman. There is no evolution when it comes to the character in that scene. So what I would do is Batman is kind of drowsy because of the explosion blast, and maybe Gordon happens to be there first and he helps him escape somehow. And that's it. We don't have to cut away to that scene. We are moving close to the car chase now. The second time that I watched it, once again, that is a scene that is incredibly badly shot, I think. It goes through every single possible cliche of car following car, pushing car, car going next to car, and then a truck goes the other way, so car has to move around and it's so stressful. Two cars driving on to oncoming traffic. Those are the things that they do, and that has been done in every single action movie when it comes to car chases, right? Plus you add rain and you add darkness and you don't understand anything that is going on. There is a scene where all the trucks start colliding and exploding together. It makes no absolute sense. I didn't care about any of that shit. If you compare it with all the chase sequences from the Batman, like the Nolan trilogy, this one is incredibly shit. Besides the ending, of course, where he jumps through the fire and dun, 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 you get it. That scene is really cool. I'm not saying that it's not cool. This is a really cool film. I'm just saying that the script is not as cool as everything else around it. Another thing that is really weird and makes no absolute sense, and that happens right after this episode here. I'm not gonna be addressing the El Rata Alata thing because it's incredibly stupid. I want to delete it as much as possible, but I don't even know what kind of purpose it serves, besides the fact that Batman kind of asks himself, you are El Rata Alata? You are El? Oh my god. Like, if you think about it, that entire scene was just for that. It was just so that the Penguin would call these two people stupid, so they would think a bit more about the riddle, so that they could figure it out. And it's a huge sequence. It's a really, really long sequence if we add onto it the drug bust at the very beginning, right? It's incredibly long. It needs to be shortened or even cut away completely when you think about it. But I wanted to talk about what happens right after, which means that it is not explained why the Riddler decides to send the bomb to Bruce Wayne to kill him instead of doing it himself. It's not explained at all. He's been doing that since the beginning of the film, and now he's completely changed his modus operandi, and it makes no sense. It's the easiest way from a script perspective to make sure that someone else gets bombed instead of Batman, and it's really stupid, and there are no logics behind it. The whole idea of the Riddler working with that kind of sins of my father thing doesn't work as well, because when you think about it, Bruce Wayne, he's an orphan. His parents paid the price of being corrupt. They died, and he was an orphan for an incredible amount of his life, for most of his life, and it's so sad. So it's the thing that they share together. So it makes no sense for the Riddler to actually want to punish Bruce Wayne, since he's already been through a lot of shit, right? For me, that was just the only way for the screenwriters to tie together the origin story of Batman, the mental problems that Martha had as well, and all of that kind of stuff into the Riddler conspiracy. For me, there was no purpose to all of that kind of stuff. There was no need, especially to antagonize the Riddler with Bruce Wayne. This of course leads to Alfred taking the blast of the bomb on his own. I didn't really care about that scene because Alfred, I think, is a poorly written character within this film here. But I think it would have been interesting to use that scene to make sure that Batman becomes more and more and more relentless, more spontaneous, more violent, because he desperately wants to catch up to the Riddler, who has been leaving him behind for the entire film. So for me, Alfred needed to die. If Alfred died, it was the first time, first of all, that I think an Alfred would have died within the cinematic different universes. It would have been way more interesting. Maybe he could have even died in his arms or something like that. Something that we've never seen. It would have been cool, instead of doing the weird delay, the time delay that they did. And I think it would have allowed us to care for this Alfred, even though he didn't really have a lot of things to say, a lot of development. And also it would have motivated Batman to be even more energetic. While I feel like just because Alfred survives, Batman doesn't really care. Another thing I mentioned briefly before is that I want to believe that Batman can actually succeed. I want him to save someone. I want him to go at one of these crime scenes and have a scene like the one we had with Coulson, where he actually manages to save someone. And we don't do it just at the very, very end. Even though at the very, very end, he doesn't manage to save that many people when you think about it, because the Riddler actually wins. We are getting towards the end of the film here, so of course, when finally the Riddler shoots Falcone, Batman manages to find the apartment where the shot came from and arrives before the police for once, which is really cool. And they find them at the diner, which is incredibly stupid. For me, it makes no sense. There is no explanation for why the Riddler would decide to be captured by the police. There is no absolute reason at all, and I actually have an interesting rewrite that kind of arranges some of the problems that the second and the third act have. I still want Paul Dano to be captured, but I want Paul Dano to be freed as well, just in time for the final show for the third act. I want Paul Dano to prove that basically the system is so corrupt that even a person like him would be freed almost immediately because of lack of proofs. And I actually have an entire idea on how to do this. Basically, of course, we already shown that he's a very clever person. He uses like a lot of different kind of bombs, different kind of hacker things. He's able to automatically like hack into things and send out emails to a lot of people. So it wouldn't be that hard, I think, to make sure that he could be freed. And he could also inspire, once again, more people to step up and follow him in this crazy plan. Just because he would get caught but also freed, he would prove that he was in the right and that the system needed to be destroyed from the inside completely. My idea is that the Riddler didn't actually do any of the crimes since the very beginning. He will always copycat. He has never worn a mask, despite when he was trying to convince these other people to follow him for the very final scene. I actually had an idea where Batman could figure this out, where he would catch one of these Riddlers while he was trying to prepare another crime scene, and maybe that's the person that he ends up saving, like I said before. Like, he ends up saving the victim, he ends up stopping a version of the Riddler, but he ends up finding that way too late. And then we find out that the Riddler is not doing the things that he's been saying. He's basically like a PR marketing genius, and he's been convincing other people to commit those crimes and keep the same modus operandi. And it would make sense actually how some people would be killed in certain ways but not others. It would make sense because everyone would be creating their own traps and interpreting everything in a different way. And this would give the real Riddler an out for him to be freed by the police, so that he could prove that justice doesn't exist. Another interesting thing is that this allows Paul Dano to look exactly like he does in the film. I really don't like the look of Paul Dano. I think they put way too much money into creating the weird penguin look with Colin Farrell's face. They could have invested that money into Paul Dano and making him look really, really weird in the same way that they made the Joker look weird for just a deleted scene. It makes no absolute sense. So if we go with this theory here, if we go with this rewrite, then it makes sense for Paul Dano to look like an everyday guy, because he is an everyday guy. He's just the mind. He's just been convincing all of these people to do all of this stuff using a mask, while on the inside he's just a normal person. He just looks like this normal nerd, and nobody ever saw him, nobody ever cared about him, nobody ever noticed him before he put on the mask and he started preaching his weird thing. And what I would imagine actually for the final act, because I think that the flood thing doesn't really work, I think we need to scrape it a little bit and change it around. I still like the idea of the bombs, but I don't think that the flood works, because when you think about it, it kind of undermines the whole idea of having these people with guns shooting at the politicians in the stadium. You're literally killing thousands of people through the flood, so why the fuck would you even put these weird Riddler copycats there to shoot at more people, when you've literally killed probably thousands more just by using the bombs and creating that flood? It makes no sense. So I want to use just bombs, and I want to do that kind of thing maybe that Bane did when it comes to blowing up the stadium or portions of the stadium, trapping everyone inside, and maybe executing everyone live, which would be so incredibly scary. And this would be the first time where the Riddler actually appears as himself, and he takes off the mask and he puts it on once back more. And here we have Batman versus the Riddler, something that we haven't seen in the film because they actually never confront each other besides in the prison scene. It's incredibly stupid in my opinion, but I feel like in this third act here it works much better, because we've got Batman that physically almost incapable because he's got bruises, he's bleeding from everywhere, emotionally completely distraught because he's always been one step behind, never understanding the clearer picture until it was too late. Alfred is dead. Catwoman is not really a love affair in my version of the film, so he doesn't really rely on her as much as he does in this film. He has literally no one, and Gordon is maybe the only friend that he has at the end of the day. And that's the confrontation. We get a really cool fight where he's trying to stop the terrorists from killing people in really creative ways. He's trying to stop the bombs maybe from exploding at the same time or something like that. And I want Batman to be so tired and be beaten down by the Riddler with the same kind of weird like manic like violence that he has, you know, within the film itself. For him to get tired, you know, and just sit down and be like, I wish you could have seen the world the way that I did, or something like that. And then Batman to inject himself with the same thing that we saw in the real film and to kick the shit out of the Riddler, making him bleed, destroying his face as much as possible, and realizing that he basically has lost, and now everyone sees him as this weird like violent crook that was not able to make anything better. He just saved maybe a couple of people, but he didn't really stop the Riddler. He just proved to everyone that Batman is just as violent as the Riddler himself, maybe. So we have a Batman that is still defeated. We have a Batman that is not loved really by the people, even though he managed to save some. It's just that they can't recognize it because he was streaming the whole thing live, and everyone saw the true face of Batman as he was destroying him. Maybe the Riddler could even die. Maybe he could die on live television, the same that they did for Spider-Man Far From Home, if I'm not mistaken. But he could do that with the face completely destroyed and Batman just looking incredibly just tired and going back home, lying down maybe on the couch with like blood coming down of his fingers and not knowing where to go next. This is what my Batman looks like, to be honest. I think that I haven't even gone through all the different details. There are a lot of things I want to change, but this video has become like quite long already. I really hope they enjoyed my tiny rewrites and all the things that I wanted to change when it comes to the Batman. Let me know down in the comments all the things that you would have changed or improved when it comes to this film. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you enjoyed my past video on the Batman as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Every single like that you drop will go to Matt Reeves for his effort to create a Batman film that really looked like the comics, because I did really enjoy the visual style and the soundtrack, of course, as well. I think it still deserves a lot of our appreciation as fans of Batman. But I hope that you still enjoyed my rewrite, even if you don't agree with me. Have a good day. I'm Patrick, and this is Torn Apart.
Something's in my ass.